In these perilous times, see from current events how biblical prophecy is coming to pass in front of our eyes. You're watching In the Last Days, the program that looks at Israel and the end times with teaching from a Hebraic perspective. With Martin and Natalie Blackham, thank you to our friends and partners who make this program possible. Now, here's Martin and Natalie.
Shalom, my friend. It's wonderful to be with you again today. This is In the Last Days TV program. My name is Natalie Blackham. Martin today is behind the scene. And we want to be a window for you of where you can see what's happening in Israel. Again, today I have my very dear friend, Norman Feingold. We are working together with Christian Friends of Magen David Adom. And so we are asking Christian to donate and stand with us to help Magen David Adom, which is the emergency services in Israel. And now we're doing a program we want to speak about, like we were carrying from last week, speaking about what's happening. There was the great Aliyah when the state of Israel was created, and there is still an Aliyah going. You know how about anti-Semitism is rising all around the world, and there is an increase we can see in France and in different countries, and we're going to speak about these things with Norman. And we're having a discussion and speak about what's happening and how you can contribute and how we are involved as Christian and Jewish people together. So Norman, thank you again to be with us.
Pleasure.
Thank you to take the time to be with us. Norman has been for more than 60 years a Zionist, and we spoke about it last week, and really raising funds to bring the people back in the country, to build Zion, to build Israel, and he has many more stories to tell us. So Norman.
Natalie, I think I would like to start by going back to 1947-46. Those days after the war, those days after the knowledge of Belsen, of Buchenwald, and all those terrible, terrible happenings. I'd like to go back to the days when the Jewish people were in despair. I'd like to say back to the days when a Jewish child was picked up by its feet and its head crushed against the oven door, a guy in the gas chamber. I'd like to go back to those tears. And I'd like to go back when the state of Israel, before the state of Israel was declared. A long time back now. It goes into the history books. But because of my age and because of what I've experienced in my lifetime, I still have tears. The remnants of Jewry tried to make their way to what was then the land of Palestine before the establishment of the State of Israel on May the 14th in 1948. They came back on what they call the illegal boats, like the Exodus, which you all heard about. And they came back, and the British were in charge, took most of them into captivity. Some managed to get in one way or the other. But we had mothers and children and babies and daddies and grandfathers on these boats, the boats of the Mapilim, the illegal immigrants, coming to the land of Israel, were taken by the British. They were taken over. They'd come out of death camps, taken over to Cyprus, locked up behind barbed wire, and treated again in another camp. Can you imagine the feelings and the heartbreak, the dreams which they dreamt about, the possibility of coming to this land of Israel, God's promised land? It was all there in their hearts, and suddenly back in another camp, reminiscent again of Sobibor and the other various death camps of Europe. Remember, these were people of a generation. They'd lost their mothers and their fathers. They'd lost their brothers and their sisters and their uncles and their aunts and their grandparents. They knew what had happened to them. They knew this annihilation of the Jewish people was going on, with the acquiescence of many, by the way. The acquiescence of many. And there they were in Cyprus. When Ben-Gurion declared the State of Israel in 1948, he was asked just before the declaration, should we do it now or should we do it later? This declaration of a state. He says, Lo ma'uchar achshav. Not later, now. Let us bring our Jews home. And with the opening of the State of Israel, these Jews from the camps of Cyprus returned with light and promise back to the promised land. We began to put the word promise back into the promised land with the return of the Jewish people. Let me tell you another story. A story which I was involved in. Many years ago, because I founded an organization called Achdut, meaning unity in Great Britain, with hundreds and hundreds of people raising money to rescue Jews. I used to bring group after group to Israel to witness the wonderful events that were happening and the return of the Jewish people. And our hearts used to beat with joy and pleasure because they were there, they were seeing it, it was live, it was real, not just something out of a fairy story book. But this was the Bible coming back to life. And they came with reverence. Now, we used to go to Haifa, and we used to like to go on the ship called the Moledet, which I mentioned last week. But my father and mother lived in Haifa. And my father used to come with me. I used to take him as my guest wherever I went. He was a religious man, well on in years, but he loved the State of Israel. He was born in Manchester, but lived in Haifa. Anyway, long story short, one day, with a group of about 30 members of Achdut, we went on the Moledet.
So the Moledet was the ship who was going
up and down the Mediterranean, picking Jews up from place to place and bringing them along the Mediterranean, along the borders, to the port of Haifa, back to their promised land. Now, this was a period when the State of Israel was already formed and there were no British troops, nobody to stop it. It's not the story of the Exodus. This is a story of the return. And they shall come from the four corners of the earth. And we were bringing them. So I took my father with me, and I took this group, and I was the leader, and I took them onto the boat. And we met a group of people. For the first time, I met a lady who'd come out of Russia. Before that, no. I knew them from Morocco, I knew them from France, I knew remnants of the death camps, you name it, but I never met anybody from Russia. The woman did not speak English, and she did not speak Hebrew. She spoke Yiddish. My father, by the way, was absolutely fluent in Yiddish. And let me tell you how the story went. My father looked at the woman. We all gathered round. My father was the interpreter. And he said, in his own way, in his amicable way, he says, Mrs. Woman, that's the way he addressed people, Mrs. Woman, you come from Russia. What is your Russia like? Is there any Yiddishkeit in your Russia? Yiddishkeit, she said. What do you mean by Yiddishkeit? Yiddishkeit means Jewish involvement, religious Jewish involvement in Yiddish. She said, well, Father said, well, when we have a little boy in Britain where I live, or I did live, when we have a little boy, we have a Brit Milah. We have a circumcision. 8 days, the child is circumcised, becomes part and parcel of the Jewish nation. Do you have a circumcision in your Russia? And the woman says, You're being foolish. In our Russia, we're not allowed to have circumcisions. It's out. No circumcisions. He said, well, you've got no circumcision. He said, tell me, do you have a bar mitzvah? When the boy's 13, do you celebrate his coming of age, where he accepts the responsibility of a Jewish person? Mister, she was replying me in his own coin. No, we have no bar mitzvah, don't be foolish. So my father was becoming anguished. And he says, with all us listening, he said, well, just tell me, if you have a daughter, we look forward to the day, as I look forward, speaking about himself, to my daughters when they got married, that we had a chuppah kedusha, we had a ceremony and a canopy, and we got married according to the laws of Israel and the Jewish people. Do you have a chuppah? And I'm cutting this story short, believe me, I am. And she says, Mister, we have no chuppah kedusha, we have no ceremony, there is no rabbi. To get married, finished, full stop. So my father, with many other questions involved in between, turned to the woman again. He had tears in his eyes. He was crying. He says, you have no Yiddishkeit. You've got nothing. I've only got one question left to you. One question only. Just one question left. Nothing more. Where do you bury your dead? Do you have a Bet Olam? Do you have a cemetery? A Bet Salem in Yiddish? Do you have anything of that nature? Where do you bury your dead? And she says, Mister, again, you're being very foolish. You're asking me the question. She came, by the way, from Kiev in the Ukraine. She says, we bury our dead in a field. There's no rabbi. There's no ritual. There's no Olei Rachamim. There's no Kaddish. There's nothing. We bury our dead in a field. So my father spun away from the woman. He put a hand on her shoulder like that. He says, Mrs. Woman, there's no Jewishness. There's nothing in your Russia. There's no Yiddishkeit. And the woman put her hand back on my father's shoulder and span him round till he faced her like I'm facing you. And he says, Belev Shelanu. That's what she said. In our hearts is our Jewishness. And that's why I'm returning to the land of Israel. That is a true story. Believe me, I was there. But let me go on with the story. A short while afterwards, my own mother, who I love so much, a wonderful, wonderful lady, my own mother died in Haifa. And she was buried in Haifa. I stood next to my father at the grave. This is God's my judge. And the tears running down his woebegone cheeks, this elderly man. And I thought of the woman on the ship, the woman from Russia. I really did. I thought about her. I thought if my father could not have buried my mother according to the way he'd believed all these years, according to his faith, this would not have been a family loss. It would have been a Jewish tragedy. So I cry on behalf of my father to this day. He buried my mother according to Jewish tradition. This woe-begone old man, and I thought of the woman on the boat. Jewish belonging and Jewish behavior is a heritage which we've received from our grandparents and our great-grandparents going back so many centuries. We carry the words of the Torah in our heart, and we carry the love of human beings. We don't go in for persecution. We don't go in to bedevil people. I thought of my mother lying in isolation in her grave. I thought of my father, and I thought of the woman on the boat. I can tell you again another story. Just before my first wife died, Elaine is my second wife, as you know, I said to her, she was a lovely lady, by the way, you'd have liked Zelda. She was a ballet dancer with Sadler's Wells, she was well educated, came from Cape Town, Jewish, parents Jewish. And I said to her, just before she died, I said, Zelda, did I make a mistake? Have I spent all these years running around for the Jewish people, running around for the rescue of the Jewish people, running around for Magen David Adom too? Did I spend all these years when I could have been earning possibly millions of pounds and feathering my nest and giving you a palace to live in? Did I do right or wrong? And this dying lady, this wife of mine, said to me, Norman, you did the right thing. And those were virtually the real last words from my dear wife to me. You did the right thing. You work for the Jewish people. You work for redemption. You work for promise. And you work for Jewish future. You did the right thing. This is the way you believed. And this is the way you acted. So I bless her memory. And I bless those words. That was with my own wife. I spent a lifetime. I want Christian people to join me with Magen David Adom. I want you Christian people to save lives in Israel, be they Jewish or be they Christian or be they Druze or be they even Muslim, I don't care. I want life to be saved. I want people to participate. I don't want your children and your grandchildren to look over their shoulders with regret and say, Mum, what did you do? Dad, what did you do when you could have done it? I don't want that. In my age, I want nothing for myself. I'm 89 years of age. Life goes on. I've had my spell. I've done my deeds. But I do want your children, Christian children and Jewish children, to stand up for the return of the Jewish people. I don't want you to look on with indolence and laziness when Jews are being persecuted in so many countries of the world, when anti-Semitism is rising its ugly head and spitting forth its venom. I don't want that. I don't want you to be idle. I want you to stand up for Israel. I want you to make contributions, yes, if you've got anything, only according to your means, to the land of Israel, to Magen David Adom, via my dear friend Natalie. I want you to do that. I want the Christian to be recognized as a partner of the Jewish people, not to be separate from the Jewish people, but to be all children of the Almighty. When I look at Jesus in his lifetime, and I look at the fundamental prayer of the Jewish people, Shema Yisrael, Hear, O Israel, the Lord is God, the Lord is one. It's the same prayer that Jesus said. There's no difference. The Last Supper, which Da Vinci painted so well, I see as the Seder night, which I've just gone through. It's the same Last Supper. It is no different. I want the Christian people to hold hands with me and the generations to come and to say, yes, we are partners. We do love each other. We do want to see the return, because the redemption of the Jewish people will be, believe it or not, the redemption of the Christian people. Mm-hmm. And the redemption of the Christian people are endemic in the survival of the Jewish people. We are partners in love. Jesus taught love. You're the language of love. You're the faith of love. You have to illustrate love. If a man has a wife, his first duty, in my opinion, is when he wakes up in the morning, say to your wife, I love you. Let her return the compliment. But you have to show love. It cannot be just a silent issue. You have to demonstrate by your actions that which you believe in. Otherwise, what is your belief? Empty words without deeds. That's not the way of James. Mm-hmm. No, go and do it. Do it because you should do it. Do it because you're a real Christian, and a real Christian means activity. Be in touch with Natalie, who's conducted this program, not with me. Count me as a kind observer. Count me as a friend of the Christian people who wants to unite us all under one banner, the banner of the Almighty. Count me as a friend of the Christian people who say to you with sincerity, you are my brothers, you are my sisters, you are my loved ones. I don't have to know you personally. You don't have to know me. But you have to make, if you're a Christian at heart, you have to make a declaration of faith. That declaration of faith has to have an avenue to explore. It's a breakthrough. It's a realization that the Christians are true partners. We have in London, as an example, for the first time ever, a young lady called Caroline who comes from the Argentine. It's the first time ever that London Magen David Adam, the ambulance service of Israel, has ever employed a Christian person to do their job. We're coming together. You have to help it to come together by your action, by your declared love, and by your recognizable love. Not just by saying, oh, I support the land of Israel and I hope the Jews return. That's not good enough. You've got to push the cart forward. You've got to labor for its success. You've got to dream about its future. And you've got to manipulate everything you do to make sure that that future becomes real and recognizable. My dear friends, rescue is wonderful. Today, many of the Jews can come from the four corners of the earth. In Ukraine, you're having a problem at the moment. Persecution, anti-Semitism, lands of pogroms. Why do you think my grandfather left that Galicia, that Ukraine of those years gone by, or Poland? Because of persecution. Because there were such things where the Jew, the religious Jew, was forced into the army for 25 years, forced to eat bacon when he didn't want to eat bacon, forced to cut off his side locks if he had side locks, and forced to serve in the Russian army, and cast away Judaism.
Yeah,
His
because
parents,
when you say that when they had to go to the Russian army, they were like taken for many, many years. And
25 years.
That's it, yeah. Because people don't know that. Yes.
25 years. Very few came back as active Jews. They'd been poisoned mentally.
And they were taking some of the sons. You had to give some of your son in the army.
You had to give everyone is allocated. We had to allocate so many of your children. Those who were very wealthy may have paid and got other people to go, but the vast majority of the Jews there were not wealthy. They lived in what they call the shtetl, little villages. They knew their God. They knew their way. They knew not any Russian army. And the Russians weren't the most peaceful of people to go and treat these recruits. Far from it. So the Jew looks back to the pogroms. And when we talk about the Jews that left Russia and those countries of the East, went to America, went to Britain, went to South Africa, later stage. When you think of those Jews, why did they leave? Because it was a land of plenty, because it was a land of kindness. They left because, again, they were faced with despair. They were faced with the despair that the heritage which they believed in was being stripped away from them. In our grace after meals, which we say at the end of the meal, we say so clearly, Asher hinchalta ala avotenu b'eretz chemda tova u'chava, which was bequeathed to our forefathers, this land of beauty and plenitude. The Jew always had the dream. On Passover, at the end of the Passover service, it was only this last week, we say B'Hashana Haba'ah B'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. You may say, do I have to say it? I live in Israel. It's a spiritual prayer as well as a physical prayer. When you live here, and you have the benefit of life here, it has a spiritual quality. Next year is a free person, Asher B'Char Banu Me'Kalo Amim, who chose us from all people to received the Torah. Wonderful words. And we recognize it. And the Christian people are our brothers because Jesus was Jewish. His prayers were my prayers. His Shema Yisrael was my Shema Yisrael. His Kaddish was my Kaddish. His Last Supper was my Last Supper. There's no distinction. There's no difference. It's been distorted by so-called Christians over generations. They've poisoned the chalice. They shouldn't have poisoned the chalice. And when we see the events which I've just told you about the return of the Jewish people with hardship, it's been like buying cattle out of a cattle auction. It's been like buying fish of a fish slab. You pay your money and you get your human being. It happened in Cuba. We paid. Happened all over. We paid. But thank God. Israel is flourishing. Yes. Excuse me.
Israel Chai.
Israel is flourishing, and it's flourishing in partnership with the Christian world. And the Christian world has got a new vista, it's got a new vision. The Christian world is also seeing things differently. It never happened before. Before it was the Christian was subject to the teaching of the ancient church. Today the Christian is thinking for himself. And the church today the Christian is moving forward with the Jew in partnership.
And you know, friends, it's so wonderful. We are working together. We're doing some program today together, but we're working together, and it's like Jews and Christians together. And we want to bring you more stories. See you next week. And don't forget, we're living in the last days.
You've been watching In the Last Days, a TV program with Martin and Natalie Blackham, the program that looks at Israel and the end times with teaching from a Hebraic perspective. If you would like to financially support the program or find out about conferences, meetings or ministry products, then please contact us with the details on your screen. Visit our easy-to-use website at www.inthelastdays.com and register for our free e-newsletter. Get the latest news from Israel, product information, online video teaching, or watch today's TV program at a time that's convenient to you. Thank you again, friends and partners, for making this program possible.
See you same time, same station for the next program from In the Last Days.